Deze podcast is powered by ACC ICT, de nummer 1 Kubernetes specialist van Nederland.
Welkom bij weer een nieuwe aflevering van de Nederlandse Kubernetes podcast. De podcast over Kubernetes voor iedereen. Ik ben Ronald Kers en ook deze keer zit ik weer met...
Hallo Ronald.
Jan Stomphorst, Solutions Architect bij ACC ICT.
Zeker.
Ja, toch? Ja.
Zeker, nog steeds. En nog steeds podcastmaker ook, hè?
Ja. Nee, maar probeer je een beetje te overvallen, hè? Ja, een beetje,
dat lukt niet, hè?
je comfortzone soms.
Oh. Dus nog steeds in DevWorld.
Zeker.
In de devwereld.
In de devwereld, inderdaad. En zoals altijd hebben we hier weer een mooie gast.
Zeker.
Ja, zal ik hem introduceren dan?
Nou, dat lijkt me een heel goed plan.
Oké dan. Dat is Dave McAllister. Welkom, Dave.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on board. This is fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. I can see you're a senior OSS technologist at NGINX.
That means?
Yeah, that was my follow-up question. Yeah. Oh.
So yes, I'm an open source technologist, which means I work with all of our open source projects at NGINX. We have about currently 86 public repos, leading from the one everybody knows, open source, the NGINX open source core project, which runs about half of the internet traffic in the world, all the way down to things like an S3 gateway, which we wrote as a proof of concept and turns out to be the 9th most popular project we've ever had in our lives. So technology-wise, what I'm doing is trying to make sure that the community is represented to NGINX, because NGINX is owned by F5. There's this commercial entity that says somewhere we're supposed to make money.
Yeah.
But community and corporations are different. So my job is to try to do the translations between the two. There's also a little bit, I got started before this thing was ever called open source. I started with Samba 2.0 in 1992. I got into Linux 0.93, I think either November or December 1994, and basically kicked off a huge number of efforts starting in Silicon Graphics days when we released the XFS file system to open source under GPL2 and on. So my roots have been in open source and I kind of grew up with it, which is very different than people coming into it now.
Yeah, so what piqued your interest in the IT when you were starting?
So I got started with Samba, interestingly enough, before there was all this thing around Linux, okay? Because I was working in the operating system group at SGI, and I needed to be able to exchange files with Microsoft Shutter for this. And it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to write this thing? And somebody said, oh no, there's this project you can go find. Long before Google was ever even a thought, okay? It's called Samba. So I found this project and went, oh, well, great. It lets me read Microsoft files. And then looked at the people who developed it. And I went, Jeremy works 3 cubes down from me. So I walked over and said, Jeremy, do you know anything about this Samba thing? And he goes, oh yeah, me and Andrew wrote it a couple of years ago because we needed to be able to do this thing. And I went, oh my God, this is really cool. And that got me into this concept that said, even if I have a problem, I can solve it. Or I can look and see if somebody else has solved it and I can help them make it better. And that to me was the driving force between what got me into this concept around open source. It's all of us working together can make something so cool that nobody else is going to be able to work with it. And SGI days, think about it, supercomputers. How many supercomputers these days don't run Linux? In the top 500 category, how many don't run Linux? And the answer is 0. The top 500 supercomputers are all running Linux. And that's how we can look together, make something better, make something bigger than anything we've got ourselves.
Okay, cool. And yeah.
No, it's not cool. It's really cool.
Super tough, as let's say.
But Samba is still around.
Yeah, Samba is still
Live and kicking and awesome.
And there are about 40 main contributors. Samba still works perfectly. I still have it, even though I don't use a Windows machine anymore. My wife does. But so
it hurts. I can see it in your eyes, right?
Only when she looks at me and says, oh, something doesn't work. Can you fix it? And the answer is no.
Reboot it. Oh, awesome, awesome. Back to your question. No, it's fine. I like this kind of segue. Now, you have a talk here at DevWorld, and that the talk is Know Your Data, the stats behind the alerts.
Yes.
Take us...
So let me again, I tell stories for a living, if you can't tell. So for years, I did a talk on observability, open telemetry, which was sort of the data science, the rules that you think about when you get this massive amount of data coming at you. What do you do with it? What makes sense inside of it? And in one of those rules was this rule around if you're using historical anomalies or sudden changes, don't use a mean. And afterwards, every time I did this talk, somebody would walk up and go, I know I should use this median now, but what does it do for me? You should draw a picture. So I decided I drew a picture, and I said, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build this talk, and no one will ever want to hear this talk. But I could just now send you the slides. I don't have to do it all the time. I can send you the slides. In the first 22 months, I did the talk 43 times. But it starts out with a simple question, and I'll throw this out to you. What's the difference between a mean, a median, and a mode? They're the three most common types that we use in stats today. And generally, I look at the crowd, and about 85% of the people will raise their hands when they say mean, about 50 on median, and about 10% on mode for this. It's a trick question. There are lots of different means in the world, and I didn't tell you which one. And so we go through each of these pieces, what makes up the stats and why you care. Where do you use it in a DevOps environment? Right now we have all these wonderful graphs. We have these alerts, and we have no idea what the graph is telling us or what the alert is telling us. We just trust the machine to do it correctly. Conference has got a lot of AI discussion going on, okay? Go ask your favorite AI tool to do something in statistics, and you've got about a 2/3 shot that the answer will be wrong, and you will believe it. Yeah. So I don't necessarily trust what it's telling me until I know what it's trying to tell me behind the scenes. But yeah, by the way, use a median, because if you use a mean, the mean changes. If you have an outlier, the mean changes hard and it's slow to recover. Mean changes of one data point. And so it doesn't have an impact on your next measurements. Your first measurement is fine. It's all the other ones that are impacted by using a mean instead of a median as your central point. So that's the basic of what the talk is. But I get a little bit into how to lie with statistics. I talk about some interesting correlations. For instance, there's a correlation between energy generation in the Netherlands and the number of marriage licenses sold in California.
How did you ever get to that point?
Sitting for that. I want to hear that.
There's also an almost perfect correlation between the sale of beer and people getting married.
Well, that's more
Okay.
your field beer, so.
So does drinking cause marriage, or does marriage cause drinking? So it doesn't actually, it's what's called a confounding variable. Neither one apply, very honestly. It's the fact that as the population grows up and gets older, you have a line that says they're going to buy more beer and they're going to get married.
Yeah, you're a numbers guy, I get it.
Well, yeah, it's more the fun side of numbers. The stats, the data scientists and I can get into some interesting arguments. Fortunately, we both get along well, but so they'll ask me a question and I will immediately show them where it's biased. And so they'll change their question and then they change their bias, but questions are always biased.
Right. Yeah. But you also talk about do you need a Gaussian or normal distribution? Can you elaborate on that one?
So normal or Poisson distribution is the bell-shaped curve that we're all used to.
Okay. Yeah.
Center is blah, blah, blah here. So what a Poisson is what is the probability of a number of events happening in a time frame. So it's like you have, and in my space, NGINX, we're handling requests. We get tons and tons and tons. In fact, that's why it was originally written, was because they wanted to solve a problem called the 10K problem that was existing in Apache at the time. So how do you determine whether the number of requests you're getting is right or wrong? And a Poisson distribution will show you that almost immediately. You can also use an exponential distribution, but I didn't find that one out until I wrote the talk, very honestly. But nonetheless, so if you say, I should be getting 100 requests per second, and my number suddenly goes up to 150 requests per second, is that an outlier? Should I worry? Or is that marketing decided that they're going to give away something it didn't tell me?
Maybe a little bit of both.
And it can be both. It honestly can be both. You know, and the other side of the coin is there was a Amazon days, I want to say 2016, 2017, where they launched a new microservice. The day came along and they were getting orders in, but nobody recognized that the orders weren't the way they should be. The volumes weren't increasing because they had messed up the way that microservice scaled. Whereas once again, looking at a distribution, the correct distribution would have said, well, wait a minute, we expect this thing should be still sloping up, and it's flattened out because it can't handle the load anymore. Kubernetes-based, microservices-based, you know, elastic and efficient, and all those wonderful things for this. But if you don't turn on scaling, it doesn't do you a lot of good.
No.
Of course not. You said I've got two questions.
I'll only remember one.
The first question, you said you made, or your company made, NGINX because the 10K problem in Apache.
Yep.
One.
Okay. So
What is the 10K problem in Apache?
So back in 2002, we've just had the 20th anniversary of the actual NGINX release. 2002, the creator of this recognized that he was working at a company, and he recognized the fact that they couldn't keep up with the number of requests coming in. And so they were having to do this really weird scaling issue to keep up with the Apache servers.
Mm-hmm.
The Apache servers are really great. They're innovative, and they basically drove the internet. And right now, between the NGINX and Apache, it's probably well over 85% of the traffic in the world goes through one of those two products. Sometimes both, by the way. And what happened was he looked at this and said, every time a request comes into Apache, it is dispatched as a completely separate process.
That's the workers and...
That's the worker model. And so in the NGINX model, each worker gets attached to it, but each worker is not a completely separate threaded process. It's actually a worker inside of the process. So everything is independent, but it can scale within the processor systems rather than inside the larger computer system itself. And so that was sort of the fundamental foundations of what became NGINX. So that was the 10K problem. And yeah, we ballooned past the 10K problem so many years, decades ago now. But yeah, 2004, the first release of NGINX. It became a company in 2011 and was acquired by F5. Okay, F5 people, please don't hold me to this. I think 2017. So
cool. And if you look at Kubernetes, because Kubernetes has now as NGINX, as Ingress, but it has Trafic as a big competitor, and has Istio and has API Gateway.
yeah.
We all say API Gateway is going to be the future, but what role and how does NGINX fit in that?
Okay. So
Against Trafic also, and yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this first back out at you. Are you talking about an API gateway, or are you talking about the gateway API?
The Gateway API.
That one happens a lot. those two.
Sorry. They're in your sticky point because I talk for a living, and I look at this and go, who came up with this phrase? He's so stupid.
He's really stupid.
So
Kost het beheer van Kubernetes je veel tijd en expertise? Maak kennis met ACC ICT. Zij ontzorgen je volledig met managed Kubernetes diensten op elke cloud. Gecertificeerde specialisten zorgen voor compleet beheer, 24/7 support en optimale beveiliging. Jij kunt je focussen op je core business, terwijl je Kubernetes-omgeving in betrouwbare handen is. Manage Kubernetes van ACC ICT. Jouw zorg, onze expertise. Bezoek accIct.com.
NGINX, of course, the world has changed. We're not static pages. We're not single pages. We're applications. We have these microservices behind the scenes. We have Kubernetes, and we got to do all this directory traffic. And that's where the Ingress came into play. It's basically being able to do that proxy mapping between the inside and outside worlds. And it works really well.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Unless you're dealing with more than one Kubernetes namespace environment, or you want to do east-west traffic. So for that, or you want to do something that's not HTTP, So I decide, financial companies quite often, they'll use a UDP for one part of this and HTTP for one part of this and TCPs directly for part of this and sockets, all these different pieces coming together. Gateway API said we need to be able to grow up and expand to meet the new use cases that are coming in. How do we handle Ingress into a service mesh environment? How do we handle when somebody wants to, heaven forbid, run MQQTT through the Gateway API to become part of the interchange? And by the way, for certain clouds, getting MQTT traffic is nightmarish. I did a demo once for a sensor system, and it is just nightmarish to do that. So Gateway API solves a lot of those problems.
Yeah.
Okay. But the problem is the controller, Ingress controller, I hate to say it, is good enough, and good enough wins. And so right now we're in this evolution phase where
nobody's switching.
We will slowly switch over time, but this isn't going to be cut the head off.
No.
My personal estimate is, well, let's see. Kubernetes 1.0 was announced in July 15th, 2015. For the next 3.5 years, there were lots of competitors to Kubernetes itself. For that. It's starting about 2019, 2020. Everybody kind of said, okay, Kubernetes is one. Okay. Gateway API is going to take longer. So my best estimate right now is that we'll start seeing a reasonably decent shift in about 5 years. We'll see early adopters in about 3 years make sense of this. Here's the gotcha for this, and I'll use Ingress. When Kubernetes Ingress came out as a specification, everybody could write to it and do all these cool, interesting things, but there was no solution for it. And then we had the Kubernetes Ingress controller come out of the community. NGINX wrote a specific one, given our mission is reliability, performance, security, as well as innovation. So we had a slightly different model. So we wrote one that is specifically tailored to the NGINX world. And when Gateway API evolved, it finally got approved. NGINX was literally at the table, and we wrote what's called the NGINX Gateway Fabric. The NGINX Gateway Fabric provides all that functionality, but it's trying to do it in a way that says, you, Mr. Platform Ops, DevOps, have been told to use this thing, and you don't want to have to rewrite and build everything yourself, because then you got to maintain it all yourself for this. And therefore, we built this thing, and you can put it in place, and it works. And then as other pieces become available, we add them into the NGINX Gateway Fabric. Nice, solid open source project. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it for this. And, the number of people from the community that work with us, that give us ideas, they give us code, means that the Gateway Fabric, our Gateway API, Gateway Fabric, is constantly evolving and constantly becoming closer to what the community needs. But even with that, 5 years.
And my second part of my question, you've got competitors in the Kubernetes space, like Traffic and Istio or other ones. What
differentiate?
what makes NGINX more unique against traffic?
Okay. Oh. That's late. As long as you didn't mention the one that makes my team bite their thumbs at you. No free publicity. So NGINX's mission when it started was a very clear, here's a problem to solve. And by the way, when you look at other tools that are out there that you may be familiar with, a lot of them have NGINX underneath them. And they've been added to add a specific problem.
Mm-hmm.
So we focused early on in literally being the fastest, most performant server on the marketplace. And to literally just don't break. Think of it like pipes running water through your walls. If they don't break, you don't care what they're made out of. Okay. And so that was our model. But that doesn't mean we solve every single problem that's out there. And so other tools came out to solve specific problems. When they become an interesting, useful problem that is stable, you may see it move into NGINX. Again, we're open source based, so somebody can submit their code to us and so forth. We just are going to go out of our way to make sure that you don't break the internet with whatever your code changes are. But for instance, automatic cert renewal. Okay, everybody screams bloody word about automatic cert renewal. In 2004, nobody cared about cert renewal, very honestly. Now it's an issue. It's not hard, but it's a reminder thing. And so for us, being able to say, oh, look, we can add automatic cert renewal. There are projects out there that basically said, oh my God, I can't live without automatic cert renewal, and therefore they went that way. There are also tooling aspects and things like that. So some of these tools have beautiful, lovely graphical UIs for putting all these pieces together. I've already told you, I'm old school. Give me a terminal, give me a editor, get out of my way. I'll write the bloody configuration file.
What's your favorite editor?
Actually, I am on the VI camp. I'm not.
Thank you.
I am not on the Emacs. I am. Richard is an interesting character, but basically he has no wrists left, and apparently it was from coding Emacs in the first place. And I've always felt that using Emacs kind of represented what it does to your wrists. So don't sue me, please, Richard. So Kubernetes is something you can't live with these days. If you're in the networking space, you have to deal with Kubernetes. You cannot get around it. It is so much a part of the world these days that it's becoming as ubiquitous as Photoshop. As you Google something, you don't necessarily search for something. You Google something, you Photoshop picture.
I don't Google anymore.
I try not to.
You're not going? No, I know. I use it. I think I'm using AI for my searches now.
Interesting.
It's a complete shift because I think searching with AI on the internet is much better.
It makes sense because it's going to give you a viewpoint. Use two different tools up.
Yeah. All right, let's segue. What's up? So NGINX is faster than the competitors, but and Traffic it's an upcoming tool. It's really going.
Yeah, so there are constant things, and this is sort of a reference at one point where it's, quote, good enough is. We expect our servers to be stable, performant, reliable, and if they're not, no one will use them. So at that point, you start looking at for what the outlier cases are. Do I need a particular feature set? Do I need the ability to bring MQTT into my reverse proxy server and handle it correctly? Okay. By the way, NGINX does that. So when you start looking at it, you're now looking at an edge case environment rather than the core environment. The core environment is so commonplace. Everybody knows what a web server is and should be able to do that. It's what problem are you trying to solve rather than just simply saying, I need a web server. And with NGINX as an example here, Is it a reverse proxy server, a web server, a mail server, a load balancer? And so it has all these different categories of things. But how do you combine that all into saying it's a omnibus of things on the network for routing? There's no good word for phrasing that.
For a long time, for me, it was just an alternative to Apache, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I learned it can do a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Than the web server part.
Yeah, because I had just last month I had a case that a customer of mine wanted to expose his database server. He wanted to expose it to the internet. I said, no, we're not gonna do. We're not gonna do that. But
You're on your own now.
but the use case was, they've got developers that deploying a test application, but the developers wanted to look in the website, in the database, and that database is deployed with the application. So that database is constantly unique, has no fixed IP, has no...
Right.
And you want an URL for that database. And then pops in Ingress. Because that's awesome. You've got one point. It's not fast. It's not used for production, but it's used for developers who want to log in with a URL. And then they thought, oh, we can use NGINX for that. But that's... it's a bit of a problem because NGINX is not built for that.
No, it can be used. Let's phrase it that way, because it's also there are these things called NJS, NGINX, JavaScript, which allows you to do programming around this. And so I can think of ways to solve what your problem is. There's no way in heck I had to go write it, because I'm looking at this and going, I don't care what you're telling me. That's a security hole.
But you have to connect with VPN, and then you've gone behind firewall, so NSGs.
But this is one where, flipping back a minute, that Gateway API is actually designed to target and solve that.
Yeah, that's...
Because it's down to user authentication and authorization on a specific piece. And so you can actually start doing the security things in that model. So...
back to Gateway API.
Yeah, Gateway API.
Yeah, not the other way around. Yeah, but it will happen more. Yeah. So I think we're up for our final question, Jan.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You can ask it.
Yeah. Well, Dave, how would you see the future of Kubernetes? If I put a crystal ball here on the table, what would you like to see?
Yeah. So this is always hard, because our technology moves so fast. And we know this new wild card called AI that's crept into here. Who knows that somebody might ask, one of the great model makers to say, what's the replacement for Kubernetes in the future? And everybody goes, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Enough that my crystal ball is cloudy when it comes to this. However, Kubernetes is part of our application development environment. We can't live without it anymore. Kubernetes is part of our deployment environments. We can't live without it anymore. It adds some challenges. It adds a layer of complexity. It changes the way that our abstractions occur. A former CEO of mine used to point out that abstractions make certain things easier and certain things a lot harder. So for instance, in abstractions, debugging is a lot harder. Setup and use is easier, but debugging is much harder in an abstraction-based model. Kubernetes, in the next sort of 5 years, I believe that Ingress will become part of the base Kubernetes environment. I think the Gateway API is going to need to move into that space. I believe we're going to see an evolution of tooling that makes the Gateway Fabric, the Gateway API, as easy to work with as the Kubernetes Ingress controller. That is going to be an interesting challenge because it may be use case based. And so it depends. It's always, that is really, I'm sorry. I am definitely waffling a little bit on that one. I'm most interested when I look at the Gateway API for its use in east-west traffic. I'm really, my Kubernetes team at NGINX is most interested in multi namespace support. And that's because they deal with large companies that have a lot of multi-namespace. I deal with companies that are trying to solve a specific problem, quite often in observability space, and service meshes are great for observability.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in that side. They're interested in this side. Which use case wins? Probably this side that has multi-namespace deployment because they're paying us money to begin with. So,
Yeah, I think I haven't heard yet is eBPF. He said, I'm sorry.
Is that still around? Sorry. eBPF for me is the agentless tracing model. There's lots of other things that can be used for. It's got some really cool security hooks that I don't understand, but people keep showing me these really cool security things you can do with eBPF that are well past my security brain. My security brain is going, what do you need? And I need a password that's longer than 8 characters. It should be just fine for everything, right? But eBPF is so, in a sense, is actually so centralized inside our products already that nobody knows.
Nobody knows, right?
Nobody knows, and nobody cares. I actually have an eBPF sticker on my laptop from when F5 kicked off their eBPF projects about 5 years ago. So, and it's there, but nobody knows. It's just there.
Yeah, it's just this a term that popped up, in the grand scheme of things in the future.
Yeah.
But it's already there.
Thank you, Ronald, for that beautiful insight.
Had that through the wild card in it.
Yeah. that gives often the most fun of interesting answers, right? It's a wild card. So, well, Dave, thank you very much for joining us, our podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having it. Thanks for letting me blather away.
Anytime. Love to talk to you again in the future.
Sure. Sounds good.
See ya.
Thanks.
Deze podcast is een initiatief van ACC ICT en wij zijn te beluisteren op onze website k8spodcast.nl via Spotify, Apple en alle andere favoriete podcastproviders.